I'm broadcasting to you from the Blue Lotus Temple in Bothell, Washington. Once again, I have a poem I'd like to share with you, and it's called But a Trice. It was published by Yogananda in May of 1939. I beheld thee but for a trice, and since then my gaze has ever been thy prisoner. Methinks I have known thee throughout eternity, and all that was waiting was my ever-expected meeting. In vain for thee I looked in all earth's nooks. Precious one of my heart, stayed thou there anon, yet ever deceivingly hiding within it. And we've talked a bit about this smriti, this recollection of our goodness, our recollection of our happiness, and our very dim memory, such that unhappiness and suffering feel foreign to us. I commented on that the other day. One of the emotions that are rampant these days in the worldwide pandemic and all the changes that have come with it is an increase in fear, increase in anxiety. And my wife Padma once asked Swami Kriyananda, is all fear rooted in the fear of death? And his response to that was, no, it's rooted in the ego, our sense of separateness. Because the world in which we inhabit, the world of our separateness, is forever changing and forever unstable. I remember that, and I'm not certain of the roots of this therapy in Yogananda's writings. It probably is, but Swami Kriyananda would sometimes say in a lecture or a talk or a class, when he would come to the question of negative emotions and feelings, and particularly now fear, is he would use the example of how Yogananda's Guru Swami Sri Yukteswar, when his mother tried to instill in him fear by saying there was a ghost in the closet, the young Swami Sri Yukteswar would marched over to the closet and opened the doors of the closet to see the ghost. And so the moral maxim that Sri Yukteswar quoted there was, look fear in the face and it will disappear. Well, I'm not sure that's always the case for many of us, but, and I have commented before on how fear is pervasive, and it's often not recognized by the fearful one for what it is. It's disguised as common sense, as all sorts of, wanting perfection in what I do. I'm not quite ready. I don't feel like it. All sorts of things. So fear is cleverly disguised by the ego. But Swami Kriyananda's recommendations that I recall and somewhat chuckle and enjoy at follow the lines of looking fear in the face. And the one that I remember most clearly is what I call the worst case scenario meditation. And this worst case scenario meditation is to, I don't know about literally meditating, but in any case, contemplating contemplatively the worst case that can happen. Now that, of course, requires that you actually know what the fear is. I can come back to the question of depression, which in some respects is an anxiety or fear that has no obvious source, a kind of existential anxiety. But in any case, as it relates to the therapy of specific fears, is to imagine. So let's say you have a fear of flying or a fear of heights. Now, the other issue with that is that, like fear of heights or flying, it's an uncontrollable thing. It's not rational. You get on the airplane and you feel sick to your stomach and whatever. You can't talk therapy your way out of fear of heights or fear of flying and those kinds of things. But nonetheless, the therapy that Swami was suggesting would presumably in such cases be a pretty long-term one, which is to sit and contemplate step by step in minute detail. He never said minute detail, but I'm throwing that in. The actual experience of the worst case scenario that you fear. And of course, I suppose ultimately would be the fear of death. But I find that it's also true in the resistance to meditation. There's a fear of disappearing. You don't actually put it that way, but the resistance to meditations sometimes it goes right to the root of Swami Kriyananda's response to Padma, which is fear has its roots in the ego, and the ego trying to hang on to what it's used to, the current reality. And so it is in meditation. The resistance to meditation has to do with the unwillingness to let go. But in any case, this therapy can be applied, I think, with some success. It might take a long time and many of repeated actions to specific fears. But the existential anxiety that can trigger a depression whose sources have no obvious cause. You know, Yogananda, in describing moods, which are more temporary than clinical depression, but in describing moods, he ascribed to moods the cause of overindulgence in some past life or in the current life, overindulgence in the senses as the cause for a mood that doesn't seem to have any source. And so it is that the antidote really for these kinds of things has to do with the solution Yogananda gave in life generally. It has to do with the definition of the state of yoga itself, found in the Yoga Sutras in stanza 2, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirod. The state of yoga is achieved by the neutralization of the reactive process to mental thoughts, to anything and every form of stimuli that comes to the mind, we react to. And so what I'm getting at then is that the practice of being even-minded and cheerful under all circumstances, good or bad, is really the solution. It's like leveling. Every valley shall be exalted and every mountain leveled, or whatever that word from the Old Testament that is part of Handel's Messiah, is when we become even. Now, becoming even reminds me, and I've talked about this in the past, reminds me of the philosophy or the practice of Stoicism. That's a good beginning, but the purpose of practicing even-mindedness under all circumstances is to level the karmic playing field so that you can then lift your consciousness to receive that joy, that satisfaction, that contentment, that inspiration which knows no second, that has no equalizing opposite. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita reassures Arjuna the devotee in that great conversation that constitutes the scripture that no effort spiritually is ever wasted, even if, in a given lifetime of spiritual seeking we haven't achieved enlightenment and liberation, because what we're dealing with is our true nature. What we're accessing and developing our attunement to and access to is the soul, which is eternal and changeless. And that's the key, changeless, even-minded and cheerful under all circumstances. There are so many ways in the practices of Hatha Yoga, in the practice of meditation, in the practice of the specific techniques of meditation, in which this principle rears its head, finds expression. And so that's what I want to share with all of you today on the subject of anxiety, the specific ways by which one can cognize one's anxiousness and fear, however you might describe it. It could be being depressed more in a mood now that I'm speaking, is to lift your eyes unto the hills. Swami Kriyananda talked about how he was in a mood once and he just sat down in meditation, lifted his eyes to the point between the eyebrows, and just held it there without narrative, without critique, without analysis, without reasoning, without indulging in the mood, and just held it there, really for what I think was only a few minutes. Most of us might need to do a little longer. In which case the mood, like fog under the summer sun, simply lifted and dissipated. And so that's, lifting your eyes, focusing here, in some cases, many cases, walking in place or stretching, doing movement to get out of the paralysis that fear, depression, anxiety imposes on us like that proverbial wet blanket. Is strive to just be. Sometimes a solution for things like grief and anxiety is first not to suppress it, not to resist it, but simply take it and hold it without narrative, without comment, without analysis, without reason, without indulgence. Hold it like a thing, like you're a clinician or a scientist and you're examining a specimen, a biopsy, whatever it might be. You simply examine it, hold it until the thoughts recede, and then lift. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go today with this. It's an important subject, but I've got some folks wanting to come in here and meditate, and that's even more important. Okay, great souls, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to turn this off. Be happy, be even-minded and cheerful under all circumstances.